Right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
If you attended the Ash Wednesday service, when I started my message there, I said, it's really a tough time to share a message. And I thought for a while, Pastor Steve was so into the work that he did with the transition team, that he was just going to take Lent and roll with it. Well, I was wrong, which I appreciate the opportunity to share a message. But I will start out the same way. This is really tough this morning. If you've been taking this Lenten journey that the transition team started for us to heart, this has had to be a rough journey for many of us. We've had to truly look in the mirror and self-examine our lives, not only outside of these walls, but how we've interacted and how we've worked with each other inside of these walls. So we've started with shame, and we've moved to guilt. Last week we talked about forgiving ourselves, and today we're going to look at forgiving others. So I want to start a little bit with the lessons. In our lessons today, you hear about forgiveness and reconciliation. We're going to push reconciliation off to next week and totally focus on forgiveness. In our lessons today, we hear about some people who wandered away. In Joshua, the nation wanders in the wilderness. They just were hugely disobedient at that time. It tells of a people that finally got to settle in the land that was promised by God. And at that first Passover in the land, it represented God's promise to his people, a promise that was somewhat delayed at times by their stubbornness. In Luke, in the gospel, we heard about the youngest son who wandered away and came back in disgrace. In both stories, the wanderers make their way back home out of the wilderness. In both stories, it's either the nation or the youngest son. Neither was able to really shake that disgrace right away from their disobedience. It's only the pronouncement in Joshua of God and in Luke of the Father that redeems them from their past. Today I was rolled away from you in the disgrace of Egypt. That son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And each one was followed by a feast. It's a promise of a new day. When we look at forgiveness, forgiveness is one of the largest powers in our lives. Without it, our relationships would eventually be lost. It is repetitive. We have to continue to forgive ourselves, forgive others, and focus on our sins and becoming a better person. God lovingly gives this to each of us time after time. He forgives us and we start all over again. We know the importance of forgiveness. We really do. But oftentimes we forget to celebrate it. This is that Sunday to think about that. In the prodigal son, on that long walk home, can you imagine what that son felt? It's that feeling you get in the pit of your stomach when you know you screwed up, when you know your words and your actions hurt somebody else. It's when that pain is so overwhelming that it affects you both physically and mentally. Our bodies know that pain of sin. We feel it in our bones, but we feel it in our heart. We talked last Wednesday night about having a heart of stone. When you focus on forgiveness, it breaks that heart of stone down. We talked about forgiving ourselves. And when we forgive ourselves, that's that first step towards what we need to do next. And that is to forgive others. As you think about what you need to do to forgive others, sometimes we often are forgetful. And we act like that older brother. He was harmed. He was hurt. We're not going to say he wasn't. But God offers all of us that same restoration of heart and home. You've heard ever since Pastor Steve walked in the door, he's made us focus on a couple of things. One of them has been prayer. And the other is loving and forgiving our enemies. And I think so often when we hear those words, forgiving our enemies, we can very easily attribute that to those people that are just the worst of the worst, where they hate us and they're really mean to us. But that's not always the case. Sometimes we need to realize realize that our enemy could be our spouse, or our son, or our daughter, or that person sitting next to you. Just because of the conversations or the interactions you have had. We have to remember, no matter who it is, we cannot return evil for evil. We need to bless them. We need to forgive them. And if we can't forgive those who are closest to us, how can we forgive those as we move out into our community? You might say, well, if I'm forgiving somebody else, that's truly one-sided, Pastor. Maybe it is. But if God has softened your heart that you can forgive yourself, and softened it enough that you can forgive your neighbor, it might be contagious. It's something that we can pass on. When a person truly understands in their heart how they have been truly forgiven by God, it compels you to forgive others. It should compel you to want to pass that along. But we struggle with it. It seems unnatural at times. How many times have you not forgiven your parents simply because it's a waste of my time? I don't need that friend. Really, it's too much effort. It's not. Your Father in heaven sent his Son to the cross for that very reason. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you put yourself in a position to be hurt again and again. Forgiveness is a multiple time event, but it opens up your heart to love. It opens you up to letting go and moving forward with a relationship. And you might say, that's really easy for you to say, but I'm going to tell you now, it's not easy for me to say at all. It's really difficult. I believe it. It's just easier to say than it is to do sometimes. But I want you to think about this. If you choose the path of unforgiveness, it's a whole lot harder. It will lead to bitterness in your heart. It's going to build up that heart of stone even worse. It's going to deteriorate you physically and mentally. And in a comprehensive way, it can really just destroy you. And that's not just scripturally. That's scientifically too. They both agree on that matter. So what does that mean for us? Each of us sitting in this or standing in this church today. A few weeks ago when I had a message, I reminded us about nickel mines. And I want to bring back that for just a second. When you look at what happened in Lancaster County, when those children were murdered in that schoolhouse, the Amish went. Not 2 weeks later, they went almost immediately to the family of the gentleman who did it. And they offered their love. And they forgave him for what he did. And they said, I did some extra reading. I wanted to make sure I got it right. They didn't say that they were going to forget it. How can you possibly forget a tragedy like that? But they can forgive it. And they knew there were going to be consequences. But it wasn't their right to judge and make those consequences. They passed on their love to that family. A quote from one of the elders who went to that house is this: "The acid of hate destroys the container that holds it, and it's really not good to hold grudges." That hit me really hard when I read it. So we've been doing this journey together. I hope you've been doing it not just in your heart. Yes, I hope you've been doing it, let me rephrase that. Not just sitting in your pews on a Sunday morning, but also in your heart on a daily basis. We've been asked to go through this series. We've been asked to do this because we are a broken congregation. We're asked to do that because we're broken people who need to heal through God's love. It means that we need to own anything that we are responsible for. We need to own our past, and we have some awesomely amazing moments in our past. And we have some awesomely not so amazing moments. And we have to own those. We need to soften our hearts to the people in the church today and to those we're not seeing. And as your pastor, It's a privilege, by the way. Sorry, Vanessa, I know that's not your favorite word, but it is a privilege to be your pastor. But it's also a privilege that I'm a friend with so many of you, which makes this so much harder when I stand in front of you and say that over the past 2 years, I never intentionally set out to cause any stress or problems in this congregation. But I'm well aware by some of the actions and some of the things I've done that I have done that. I've taken a long journey, and I'm still on it, by the way. I have forgiven myself. And I'll tell you what, you've got to start there because it lightens your load. Doesn't take the weight off, but it lightens the load. And I've had to come to terms, and I think the best way to describe it is just this year at school, we had something where one of my administrators was really fired up. And it was really hurtful, beyond what I could put into words for you. But I spent a lot of time in prayer. And I felt how important it is to forgive that person. And so as I work through relationships in the congregation, that's what I'm doing too. I can't come to you and say, you know, Christina, you just need to forgive me. That's not on me. So what I hope you take from this today is that each of us holds a responsibility in the congregation and in our lives. And it's not an easy journey, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't want to be traveling this journey with anybody else other than this congregation. I'd like us to end and just take a moment to think about what we've shared this morning.